All right, welcome to the Big Texas Podcast presented by Texas Young Republicans. I'm your host, Jordan Overturf, bringing to you a first in podcast history. Not all podcasts, but this podcast, the first in our history. We have an elected official joining us on the show today. State Representative Jared Patterson, up from the Frisco area, is joining us today to talk a bit about his first re-election campaign, a bit about the things that he accomplished in the legislature, but we'll get to that in a second. Wow. Early voting is almost here. Can you feel it? Or can you feel the energy? I am getting pumped for this. I just changed my registration, and so I'm excited to vote in a new county, a new precinct, get involved with the precinct convention process after the primary. As we gear up to become state delegates, we're going to be putting out more information about this process in particular on the Texas Young Republicans Facebook page. We're encouraging all young Republicans to get out there, get involved in the process, become a state delegate so you can go to state convention, take part in the process. So make sure you are following Texas Young Republicans on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Texas YRs, and the Big Texas Podcast on Twitter and Instagram at Big Texas Podcast. Wow, what a week it's been, right? New Hampshire finally all done. Bernie Sanders eked it out by, I think the final total was somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 votes, but percentage-wise, just barely around 2%. Beating out Pete Buttigieg, and then the surprise come up from Amy Klobuchar. I did not expect that personally, so it was quite a shock to see how that unfolded. And as early voting gets started here in Texas next week, we'll be gearing up to see what happens in South Carolina and Nevada. The presidential primaries move on until we get to the Super Tuesday bum rush on March 3rd, which Texas is taking part in. And our guest today is going to be on the ballot in House District 106 up in Denton County area, covering Frisco and surrounding cities. State Representative Jared Patterson just wrapped up, or is in the middle of his freshman term here in the 86th Legislature. He is going for re-election. Got a primary opponent, and we'll have a general opponent as well. But for right now, he's trying to make it through this March 3rd primary. And so I had a great time talking to him a little bit about his background, a little bit about what it's like to serve this district, and some of the things he was really proud to accomplish in the legislature. So as always, I'm talking too much. I'm going to get out of the way. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, State Representative Jared Patterson. First of all, congratulations for being the very first elected official on the Big Texas Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So first off, for people who don't know about you and HG 106, give them a brief rundown of just your background, your experience, things like that.
Absolutely. So, I'm Jared Patterson. I'm the current state representative in House District 106. I'm in the middle of my freshman term in the legislature. My wife's name is Leslie. She is a preschool teacher at a church in Frisco, Texas. That's where we live. And she teaches 2 days a week. She's got 10 4-year-olds that she teaches. I can't even imagine. She taught public school for 6 years before, and then stayed at home with our kids for about 9, and then went back this year. So she loves it. We have 3 kids, Reagan, Austin, and McKinley, that are 9, 6, and 5, 2 boys and a little girl. That's 2 Republican presidents and the father of Texas, if you're keeping track of the names there. I have no idea how she let me, have that kind of authority on.
I don't either.
It's funny, but so we live in Frisco. I'm in the electricity business.
Okay.
I'm actually the only member of the House or Senate with any background in the electricity business, and so a lot of issues there that I don't necessarily talk about in the campaign. They're not red meat. They're not particularly interesting. But a lot of issues there on the state level as it relates to our electricity grid and generation capacity. House District 106 is kind of shaped like the state of Florida, and it's in Denton County, wholly within Denton County, and it starts north of Denton in a little town called Sanger, and it follows the county line through like Pilot Point and Aubrey and Crossroads, and then over to Salina and prosper. And then it heads south through like Oak Point and Little Elm and Frisco and the Colony and Lakewood Village and down to a little bitty precinct in Plano, the one precinct in Plano that is in Denton County. So very unique district in the state. And one of the fastest growing areas and the fastest growing county and the fastest growing state in the country. And so lots of concrete being poured everywhere, lots of growth. One of the Frisco, where I live, is one of the fastest growing communities in the country most years out of the last 2 decades. So lots going on there.
Yeah, I mean, the growth up there is just insane.
It is.
You know, I don't think people who are in these larger cities kind of understand because it's always been around them. But when you're in a small community like Frisco and next thing you know, there's this giant soccer stadium that goes up and then it just all comes like a tidal wave, it seems.
Yeah. I mean, you know, Frisco is about 190-ish thousand people now. They're building their 11th high school. When I graduated from high school 19 years ago, they only had one high school in town. So that just tells you the amount of growth that's happened in the last 2 decades.
Yeah, and the amount of strain that puts on the local government and the infrastructure and all that stuff.
Yeah, and you know, they've really done a good job of managing that in terms of planning out the community. You know, they've been able to really try to stay ahead of it. I mean, we've got traffic and congestion, you know, like anyone else, and you can't have that amount of growth without. But the way that the city's been planned and the amount of huge things that they have there, like the Dallas Cowboys headquarters, you know, we've got, I think it's 7 professional sports leagues that either headquarter or teams that either headquarter there or play there. And then including most of that stuff's in Collin County, so it's not in my district, but the PGA headquarters, which is moving from Florida to Frisco, Texas, coming up here pretty soon. So they've already started construction on 2 championship golf courses.
Yeah.
We've got some major golf tournaments coming over the next couple of decades to Frisco, Texas. I mean,
Can't wait for that.
It's incredible. And all that's right in HD 106. So
Yeah.
very exciting.
No, well, and for people who don't know, like that pro golf thing is really interesting because now you can actually go to college to become a pro golfer.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. So, you know, speaking of that, we actually have a couple in Frisco that it was kind of their dream to have something golf related in Frisco. And both of their sons are really great golfers. One of them plays at SMU, and it's called the Ovards. That's their name. And that's what morphed into bringing the PGA to Frisco. I mean, it's amazing what you can dream up and what can happen in HD 106.
That sounds like the epitome of a tiny Texas dream. It is
Absolutely.
to bring the biggest thing in possible.
Absolutely.
So you have a little bit of a unique perspective going into the legislature. Were you still on the Frisco City Council before?
No, I was actually on city council in another city.
Okay.
So my wife and I, 10 years ago, actually, 11 now, we settled in a little town called Saxe in Dallas County, about 22,000 in population. I started going to city council meetings. I wasn't mad about anything. I just kind of started going. We thought, you know, this is where we're going to start our family and raise a family and all that. And I just started going to meetings, and one thing led to another. And the mayor asked me to run for city council when there was an open seat, and I was elected to 2 terms there and was really involved in the Republican Party. You know, we bought our first home there. We built our first home there. We brought all 3 of our kids home from the hospital there. But ultimately, we ended up moving over to Frisco, like most people do, for the public school system there, and which is just phenomenal. And you know, the rest they say is history. So we've been in Frisco. We made the decision to move in 2014. Our house was completed in 2015. We moved in then, and then we've been there ever since.
So you, though, have seen this kind of struggle with the property tax debate up close and personal, right?
Oh, 100%.
You know, there's a lot of reps who have that previous experience, either serving on a city council, a school board, or things like that. But for you, having that relatively close and fresh in your mind, as you were approaching SB2, do you think that the response that kind of came from cities was unwarranted, or, you know?
I don't know that I would characterize it as unwarranted. You know, I definitely didn't agree with them. But I also, you know, I could definitely see where they were coming from, because, you know, as a city, you know, you're sitting here saying, look, I'm elected by my neighbors. I see them at Kroger. I see, you know, my kids go to school with their kids. We play ball together. We know each other. You know, this is my community. And why is the state of Texas coming in and telling us what to do here? And I certainly can see where they're coming from on that. You know, what the point that I try to get across in the conversations that I was having with people is that this isn't the state of Texas taking away control from the local cities. I don't represent any cities. I don't represent school districts. I don't represent a county. I represent the Texans that live within my district, regardless of which city they're in or if they're even in a city. And so, what we did is we didn't take more power at the state level away from the cities. We put more power into the citizens' hands and said, you guys have been talking about needing property tax reform and property tax relief, and we're going to give it to you. Now, the way that all came about is a very fascinating story to those, especially the people that are probably listening to this podcast that are, involved in the process or want to be involved in the process. Mm-hmm. To put it in context, 2 years ago in 2017, the 2017 session, property tax reform was, again, the number one issue for voters, and something's got to get done. And nothing happened. Even to the point where Governor Abbott called a special session after the 2017 session and said, y'all figure out property taxes. Mm-hmm. And nothing happened. Speaker Strauss actually ended the special session without even there being anything on that.
Yeah.
So then we get to the election in 2018, and we lose 12 Republican seats in the Texas House, which was a massive shift from having 95 Republicans to 83. And keep in mind, it takes 76 votes to get anything done.
Yeah.
So it was really the leadership, especially the governor, coming in and having a hands-on approach. Governor Abbott coming in and really working with, I can't speak for the Senate, but really working closely with us in the House, talking to members, spending so much time, coming to Republican caucus meetings, coming out onto the floor, meeting with members, talking to members to get that done. And what we did was dramatic. I mean, 2 years ago, the Senate was said, we need to cut the amount of taxes that they can increase from 8% to 4%. Mm-hmm. The Texas House said, well, no, we want to cut it from 8% to 6%. And they couldn't get on the same page. We didn't do either of those things. We did 3.5% on cities and counties and 2.5% on school districts, mm-hmm. School districts being the lion's share of where you pay your property taxes. So we did better than the best case scenario from 2017. We did it with 12 less Republicans. And so I think that's why when you put this last session in context of having a very slim majority and what had happened in the last election, we had a phenomenal session as it relates to property taxes. And I know I've been going on here a bit, but just to add on top of that, we also got $5 billion worth of property tax relief. Most of the school districts in my district, actually, their tax rates were cut by 11 cents because of HB3, a bill that I co-authored and that I supported in the Texas House.
Yeah, and recapture was a big part of reducing that burden on the local school districts because that's available tax dollars that are staying in the community.
Absolutely.
The thing that I like to talk about, and it's, again, because I'm a nerd about this stuff, but, cities like to talk about that 3.5% number. But I would argue that the lion's share of the things that were good in SB2 had nothing at all to do with that cap. There are institutional reforms to the appraisal review boards to create more transparency for taxpayers when they get their bill. This was a monumental piece that says we are not informing taxpayers correctly. We are also not drawing a direct line from your home to the entity that is trying to increase your taxes. So, as these new tax bills come out, I think more people are going to finally see and understand what was achieved.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm so glad that you brought that up. I think a lot of us in the legislature fail to really talk about, and in the media too, they fail to talk about the transparency piece of property tax reform. That's a huge issue because so many locally elected officials will come out and say, well, I cut your tax rate or I cut your tax rate. Well, when your property value is going up 10% a year, it's pretty easy to cut someone's tax rate. Well, what the answer needs to be is what is the total amount of dollars that I'm paying in property taxes, and did that go up or down? And that's what we're talking about here. That's where the cap comes in. The total dollars, not the rate. The rate's irrelevant. Mm-hmm. And the property appraised value is irrelevant. It's when you put the two together that you get the amount that you pay in property taxes. And so now folks are going to be able to see who is raising my taxes, when is their meeting, where is their meeting, when can I get there? And by the way, what was the vote on raising my property taxes? So the transparency piece, which hasn't even been implemented yet because that starts this year, the $5 billion in property tax relief, that came off your tax bill in 2019.
Yep.
But the caps and the transparency items, those start in 2020, 2021. So that's a That is a major, significant change, the biggest change in my lifetime since the 80s, that we've seen in our property tax system.
Yeah, and property tax and education financing
All rolled into one.
in one session.
That's right.
So we know about those big ticket issues, but what were some of the other accomplishments that you had during session specifically for HD 106?
Absolutely. Well, for me as a representative, it was very important to me to go down there and to live up to my campaign promises. I told folks, I said, I am a deeply conservative individual and I support our public schools. And I feel like I accomplished those things. I was ranked the 8th most conservative member of the Texas House by Rice University in an independent study looking at all of our votes, at all the members. I was ranked the 8th most conservative. Any kind of conservative group you want to look at was ranked between 7th and 10th, depending on the group that you want to look at. They pull out specific bills, but I was in the top 5.3% of conservatives. And I was also able to be an effective legislator, which was also important to me. I wanted to go down there and I wanted the people in my district to have a voice, not just lob bombs and make enemies, around every corner. I wanted to go down there and be an effective legislator. And I feel I did that. I have passed 4 bills into law through the Texas House. One of which was the only tollway financial accountability bill of the session. The only tollway accountability bill of the session was my bill as a freshman that I got through transportation. Now, I've caught some grief on this, but I've got a little secret for you. I worked across the aisle with the Democrats. I know everybody doesn't like to hear that, but look, tollways are a huge issue in my district. I have 3 different tollways in my district. We have a toll bridge and 2 different toll roads. And then most of the roadway infrastructure in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, especially the Dallas area, is tolled. And so when I ran, I said, I'm going after the cost of government for people. And so property tax reform, property tax relief was big, so was tolls. Well, the chairman of transportation happened to be a Democrat this session. Mm-hmm. So, I could sit in the corner and I could sulk that it wasn't a Republican and not get anything done, or I could reach across the aisle and I could work with that person. Now, I didn't get everything that I wanted in that bill, but I got 35, 40% of what I wanted in that bill, and that's a heck of a lot better than nothing. So now the tolling entities all around the state, they all have to report certain financial data in an easy-to-read format for folks so that they can understand, how much money are they bringing in above maintenance operations? When is the debt going to be paid off? Those types of things. So a major, major issue in my district.
Are they reporting that to TxDOT? Where are they reporting that?
They have to report that on their websites.
Okay.
So 6 months after the close of their fiscal year, they have to report that documentation. 6 months wasn't my number. It's what we settled on.
Okay.
In the negotiation of the bill. So, and they were really good to work with too. The tolling entities were a partner with me on that bill. The Democratic chair of the committee ended up being a joint author with me on the bill. I would not have been able to get that bill done had I not taken my work seriously, had I not been a respectful member that wanted to represent the people in my district. If you have somebody that just lobs bombs and goes down there without a level head on their shoulders, you're not going to have effective representation for the district. Some of the other things that I worked on this session were standardized testing reform.
Yeah. I see your colleague Matt Shaheen had an op-ed that went out recently. Do you stand with him on that?
Absolutely, 100%. And Matt's a great guy, by the way. Our offices were on the same hallway, and he sat right behind me on the House floor, and he was a good mentor for me. But that's a big issue that is so unfair to our teachers, so unfair to our students. It's just a terrible issue in the state of Texas. That's not red meat stuff that everybody's talking about, but that's a real issue that affects real people in the district. And so that was another one that I spent a lot of time on. But I also hit red meat stuff too. I co-authored constitutional carry. I co-authored the heartbeat bill. I co-authored HB 1836, which was the Save the Alamo, Save the Cenotaph bill. I co-authored the ban on red light cameras that actually passed and got into law this session, where we banned red light cameras in the state of Texas. So I worked on the red meat stuff too. Voted for $800 million worth of border security. But we also did a lot on healthcare. We did a lot on the school issue, and all that. So I feel like that it was, we didn't get everything that we wanted to get done. Everything that passed, I didn't agree with either. I voted no 621 times on the House floor. 621 times I said no to leadership, to chairman of committees that let that bill out of their committee, to bill authors.
Yeah.
I've had a member come to my desk and cuss me out at my desk because I voted against their bill. That doesn't stop me. I mean, I'm for conservative, limited government. I think that government ought to do a few things and do them well. And, I'm not alone there. There's a few of us there. It seems like the conservatives tend to be the minority, but yeah, I think that overall I had an effective session.
Well, if you thought taking on property tax reform and school finance in one session was a bit of a bear to contend with, how are you approaching, I know you still have a race to win, but I imagine you're thinking down the road at what you want to accomplish in the next session. Redistricting is going to be the 800-pound gorilla in the legislature.
Absolutely.
Both chambers are going to be dealing with that. Have you begun to think about how you navigate around that specific issue to be in order to be able to deliver results on the smaller issues that aren't going to be eating up the media cycle?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I mean, this last session, property tax reform, school finance reform sucked all the air out of the Capitol. I mean, everybody's political will was tested this last session to get those major reforms passed. And it's really going to be the same thing next session in the legislature as it relates to redistricting. I remember 20 years ago when we had a redistricting session, and the Democrats fled the state of Texas. I don't know if you recall that, but
yeah.
The Democrats in the House, I think they went up to Oklahoma. The Democrats in the Senate fled to New Mexico. I think the Senate Democrats were a little smarter. They went to a spa, I think, in New Mexico somewhere, and the Democrats in the House just went up to Oklahoma to some hotel. But they fled the state to stop redistricting. If you go 10 years ago from present day, if you recall, that's when Ted Cruz was running the first time for Senate. Redistricting had been sued and all these court cases about the way that it all went. And then they ended up having that primary 6 years ago. They ended up having that primary delayed. And that's how we ended up with Senator Ted Cruz, and I'm a big fan and thank God that we did. But, had we had the primary on time in March of that year, instead of it pushed back, he might not have had the runway to get elected as he continued to build steam in his campaign. So, I say all that to say, we don't know what's going to come out of this. I think that there's only one certainty that's going to come out, and that is that a lot of lawsuits is going to come out of it. But
so a lot of lawyers are going to get rich.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Well, don't they always? The thing is, though, I think this should be a wake-up call to any Republican that is listening to this podcast. Barack Obama, Eric Holder, Stacey Abrams, Planned Parenthood, all of these folks are committing literally tens of millions of dollars to flip the Texas House this cycle, only because of redistricting coming up this session. You see it down. We've got a special election going on in Fort Bend County outside of Houston.
Yep.
And we've got a situation where Joe Biden and these folks are actually door knocking for a Democrat state rep candidate. That's how important this next session is. It's not just about redrawing the Texas House and Texas Senate lines. It's also about redrawing State Board of Education and judicial lines.
Yep.
But it's also about redrawing congressional lines, including at least 3 new congressional seats that we're going to have in the state of Texas. So when you look at this and you say not only the entire balance of power within our state government is up for grabs, the entire balance of power nationally as we redraw all these congressional seats is up for grabs.
Yeah.
I mean, if the Democrats take control this cycle, we could have a terrible situation for a long period of time nationally.
Well, and that's the only conversation I really hear Democratic candidates at the state level talking about. It's their number one issue to talk about redistricting, flipping the House. And it seems disingenuous. Do you think that voters are going to, obviously we know that a certain group of voters are just going to vote Democrat no matter what. But
right.
For the individuals that are out there thinking for themselves and going to make an informed decision, do you think that is going to land with them, this idea that we want to flip the House so we can control DC? Like, where is the message for Texans from these Democrats?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I do think that there's something to be said to have a shared and common goal and to have everyone pitch in towards a common goal. But I think you're absolutely right. When it comes down to it, when it comes down to the voter actually pulling that lever for whoever that they're going to do, especially for the first time in my adult life, where, at least that I can recall, where we don't have straight party voting in the state of Texas, where in theory, people might go, from one party to the next in November. You never know. I think that they're going to want to know, what are you going to do for me? And it was a Republican-led Texas legislature this last session that really put a lot of money towards training and a lot of money towards advocating on the issue of human trafficking, that increased penalties for human traffickers, that tackled surprise medical billing, which is a big issue for a lot of people in the state, where you go to the doctor's in your network, the hospital's in your network for your insurance, but you didn't think to check the janitor, and all of a sudden the janitor's out of network, and so you get some $3,000 bill, 6 months after your procedure done.
Yeah.
We fixed that in the state of Texas, where you're no longer going to get that. They've got to figure it out before they get the patient involved in having to pay that skyrocketing bill. When you look at the dollars that we invested in cancer research, when you look at the $5 billion worth of property tax relief, when you look at the flood mitigation stuff that we did and taking care of the situation after Hurricane Harvey, when you talk about the work that we did, on the Second Amendment, where we passed more than 10 pro-Second Amendment bills in the Texas House, these are all issues that I think that will resonate with voters, and that when they go to the poll, they say, what have you done for me lately?
Yeah.
And I don't think that the Democrats have a big story to tell there.
Well, and the thing that I find most shocking now as we get closer to the primary is I'm starting to hear some Republican candidates start to sound a lot like Democrats, and that they no longer have original ideas. It's suddenly, the legislature is terrible. They didn't get anything done. Yeah. They didn't bring you real property tax relief. They didn't address education. It's kind of this strange perception that all of a sudden just attacking the legislature is a platform for you to run for office.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm dealing with that right now. I think the problem is that by and large across the state of Texas, the Republicans said, we have a big issue in November. We have the Democrats that are together more than they've ever been. We have more money being pumped into the state than ever before. And most of the Republican groups that have historically been at odds electorally laid their arms down in the primary. And I think that's why you only see 8 or 9 contested races throughout the state of Texas in the Republican primary. So who does that hurt? That hurts the consulting class. So there's this entire group of consultants out there that make money based on contested races.
Yep.
So they have to find candidates to run for office because that's their business. That's how they get paid. So they go whisper into somebody's ear and say, you could be a state rep. You could be a state senator. You'd be great. Wouldn't you look great down there? Couldn't you do that? And so what they're really doing is saying, hey, I need my $2,500 a month, or my $1,000 a month, or my $5,000 a month stipend, and I think that you ought to run. And so I think that's what we've seen in some of the races this year. And that type of thinking is going to destroy our party. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have folks running that have no business in running for the state legislature. Take my opponent, for example. I mean, the guy's never even voted in an election in his lifetime. I mean, even this past November, when we had the opportunity to ban a statewide income tax, which luckily the voters approved, mm-hmm. a bill that I co-authored, a bill that I voted for in the House floor, a bill that I fought for, to ban a statewide income tax, he didn't even show up at the polls and vote for it. He's never given money to a Republican candidate. He's never been a member of a Republican club. He's never done anything with the party except, get a consultant talk him into running, get the talking points that the legislature didn't get anything done this session, which isn't true, and bash the legislature. I get it. I'm a freshman. In theory, I'm supposed to be a little easier to take on than somebody that's been around a little while. But I don't think that the public is buying it. I don't think that they're buying that we got nothing done this session when we had the most successful session as it relates to the number one issue for voters, which was property tax reform and relief.
Yeah. And it really, I think that's kind of the problem, is that not a lot of people dig down into everything that the legislature gets done in a session, and the amount of work that goes into 140 days. You have the first, 60 days where you don't even hear any bills on the floor, right? Yep. So you've got 2 months that you don't even get to start taking action on this stuff on the floor and getting it voted and sent out. So I guess as you go forward, how do you think we can improve that? How can we better educate voters as these things are happening? What is the best way to reach out and have these conversations?
That's a really good point. You know what? I don't know the answer to everything. I can tell you what I did this session. And what I did this session was I did a weekly Facebook Live video on my Facebook page every week. And it was really easy at the beginning of session. And as things picked up, man, it was a challenge to find time when we could do that Facebook Live video. But I wanted everyone to know what bills I was working on, what substantial bills were making its way through the legislature, who I met with that week, who all came into my office, what nonprofits, what local people from the district, that sort of thing. I wanted everybody to know what we were working on, and that's in addition to a weekly email that I put out, not that my consultant put out, that I put out Saturday night after my kids go to bed and I'm home only for the weekend. I'm in my office typing up a newsletter for people to know. Other than that, when I got back from session, I'm out talking to every single group that'll have me, chambers of commerces, Rotary clubs, Republican clubs, any group that have me to share the story of what we did this session. Again, it's not that I thought that we accomplished everything that I wanted to. You elect King Jared, we'll get all the Republican priorities done, right? But as State Representative Jared Patterson, and as someone that is one of 150, I felt like that we moved the ball in the right direction on a lot of things. I mean, we banned taxpayer-funded abortions this session at the local level. We passed some good legislation. We didn't get everything done. I would have loved to have seen the voter integrity bill passed.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have seen the heartbeat bill passed. I would have loved to have seen some of those things. It didn't happen. But in context of losing 12 seats, of having a slim majority, of having a new leadership team, some of the folks that were chairman hadn't even been allowed to be a part of the process under prior administrations. And so you had guys as chairman that hadn't even passed a bill yet, hardly. So I think all things considered that we did well. I think that I did well as a brand new member who gets my staff on day one. When I raise my right hand, my staff comes in and they're officially on the payroll, and I've got everybody's names to learn and a difficult process to navigate to be ranked the 8th most conservative state rep, to get 4 bills passed into law, to effectively represent my district and take on issues that are important to them back home. I felt like I did a good job.
Well, you're gearing up for another run at it, and what will probably be 2 of the most tumultuous sessions in recent history.
Oh my gosh, yes, absolutely.
So as we wrap up here, here's your chance to speak directly to the voters at HD 106. Why should they reelect State Representative Jared Patterson?
Absolutely. I think that folks ought to reelect me because I did what I said I would do. And you elected me last time. I mean, it's really that simple. I went down there. I was ranked the 8th most conservative member. I stood up to leadership. I stood up to chairman. I stood up to bill authors. I said no 621 times against more government in their lives, more government in their business. I was rated 100% pro-life by Texas Right to Life. I was awarded to be a 2019 Faith and Family Champion by Texas Values Action. I'm endorsed by Governor Greg Abbott, Attorney General Ken Paxton, the NRA, Senator Pat Fallon, Sheriff Tracy Murphy here in Denton County, good, strong conservative folks. The bottom line is I went down to Austin, I represented them, and I kept my word.
Excellent. Well, if people want to learn more about you, now's a chance to give them campaign website, social media, all that stuff. Where do they find you?
Absolutely. So my website's jaredpatterson.net. That's Jared, Patterson.net. Facebook at facebook.com/jpattersontx. Would welcome anyone to follow us. If they can, throw a little $8 or $10 donation our way through the website. That'd be great too.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming in. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you to State Representative Jared Patterson for joining us. If you want to find out more about him, you can go to jaredpatterson.net. You can find him on Twitter at Jared L. Patterson. He's also on Facebook. I remember watching a few of his recap videos during the legislative session. And it's really interesting to see the way representatives are interacting on social media these days. It's really a great opportunity for you to stay up to date on what is happening. Great opportunity to say now, if you're not following your representative on any social media platform, might be a good time to check in there, see what they talk about during sessions, see what they're talking about now as they get ready for re-election. That's it for us. As always, make sure you're hitting the subscribe button on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Big Texas Podcast. Make sure you're following Texas Young Republicans on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Texas YRs. And make sure you vote. Come on. Early voting starts on Tuesday. We'll be having some more interviews with candidates through early voting and all the way through the primary. And we have guests that we've already spoken with who are going to be competing in the general election, but they don't have a primary opponent. We made sure to save as many interview spots as possible for candidates who are in contested races. So that's all we got here today. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you as always. And until next time, friends, we'll see you down the road.